What I think the best companies do is think first principles about what's the objective of the company and then let it flow down from there. How should we think about building a compensation plan? Now, clearly, you're competing for talent, so knowing what other people are doing is relevant, but it doesn't mean you have to copy them.
What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to TruthWorks, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change? I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and well, a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of TruthWorks. I'm here with Patty McCord. Yay,
Hiya.
She's back. And our special guest today, Bill Gurley, who a lot of you probably know. I'm going to have you talk a little bit about yourself, Bill, in a second. But Bill is a longtime venture capitalist, former basketball player, and has invested in some of the most well-known companies in the world, like Uber and Zillow and many, many more. But recently, we were down at a little shindig in Mexico, and we started getting on a very interesting topic, which we'll get to. But before that, I have one question for you, and it's not a very serious question, but you're so famous that you've had like TV shows made about you. And the actor that they chose to play you, Kyle Chandler, who I think is dreamy, I didn't think he was tall enough. What did you think?
Well, first of all, I'll get to the question, but thank you both for having me on. I think that both of you were involved, in one of the most innovative approaches to HR in the history of our industry. And I think that, Patty's book is a must read. And I think thinking about HR from an independent mindset is critical, and first principles. And I think most people, and when I say most companies, I say 80 or 90%, and maybe higher, don't do that. They copy what they think is best practice, and they end up with mediocrity.
Yeah,
Anyway, we'll get to that. So to this point, the vast majority of people I know share your opinion of him. And unfortunately, a lot of people said to me, but he doesn't look like you at all. So that's unfortunate for me, I guess.
No. I was like, this is not doing Bill any justice here on the,
Yes.
I was a little disappointed.
Well, Jessica, glad we got that out of the way.
Well, listen, it's in my blood. I worked at Netflix. We're a content company. So tell people a little bit about your background. The other thing, too, that we all now have in common is Texas.
Yeah.
Because Patty's from Texas. You're in Texas. Now I'm in Texas.
Yeah.
I think Mr. Chandler lives close to you.
Does
Jessica,
he?
for what it's worth.
Oh.
Yes. So I'll give you like the 3-minute version. I grew up outside of Houston. My father was a very early NASA employee, and he had such an amazing journey. I think he joined in 61, 62, and by the end of the decade, they put a man on the moon.
How cool for you to be able to be like, well, my dad put a guy on the moon. What'd your dad do?
Well, I mean, a lot of people were involved. Another thing that was fortunate, my sister was a double E at Rice and was employee 63 at Compaq Computer Corporation. And she was 4 years older than me. So having that data point would become super relevant in my life. I was on the basketball team at Florida. I was mostly riding the bench, Jessica. And then I got a comp sci degree and went to work at Compaq where my sister had worked. That's why that is so relevant. But got exposed to a high-tech company that was working. Compaq was on fire at the time. Learned about stock options, learned about product cycles, learned about a lot of stuff. And my kind of ambition and curiosity told me I got to escape this and go get more. So I went to business school. Thought about trying to be a VC coming out, and it wasn't realistic. So I got a job on Wall Street covering the computer industry, and was able to parlay that sell-side analyst job into a venture capital job eventually, which several others have done, Mary Meeker and Danny Reimer, and going back to even Ben Rosen, who was a sell-side analyst turned VC. So it's not the only path in, but it's a path others have taken. And then I spent 25 years at Benchmark and loved every minute of it.
And you started a podcast.
Recently, yes.
Well, let's get into this stuff that we were kind of mentioning. When we were in Mexico, you started talking about compensation. And we were just kind of talking about how comp committees work and ISS and everybody doing the same thing. So tee us up a little bit on some of that and your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I could probably talk about this for 3 hours. There's an unfortunate reality in that I think most public companies treat their audit committee and their compensation committee the same. And the audit committee is hired to make sure you're doing everything by the book and that you're using a common accounting practice. And that's what it's supposed to do. And so you bring in outside experts, you follow the rules as much as you possibly can. And that allows the public markets to work because you can compare company to company knowing that everybody's using the same rule book. And that's probably exactly how an audit committee should work. The problem is people structure a compensation committee to look over how you compensate the employees. And I think 90% of them use that exact same mindset and philosophy that I just mentioned for the audit
board
committee.
I've ever been on. Yeah.
And so what inevitably happens is you hire a comp consultant like you would hire an auditor. And many companies ask them, what should we do? And so they're taking feedback from that comp consultant as how they should build their plan. And there's really two inputs that they've done surveys of other companies. Two, they listen heavily to ISS. And
say
we'll
what
have to
ISS
talk about
is.
ISS.
Yeah.
Institutional Shareholder Services is I'm going to call it a monopoly business. They help large funds, and especially with the rise of large index funds know how to vote on compensation, mostly on compensation. They can vote on other things. So they're proxy advisory firm. But if you're unhappy with how they've scored you, you can also pay them to learn how they score companies. That's why it's a racket.
That's right. You know, Bill, when I was writing my book, I didn't write it, I talked it, right? And my editor was terrific. And so when I got to the chapter on compensation, I said to her, I'm like, do you know how this works? Do you know about salary surveys and job leveling and, midpoint and max point, and bell curve distributions? And so I'm explaining it to her, and she keeps getting more and more agitated. She's like, are you shitting me? But that's crazy. I'm like, yeah. She's like, well, who does this? Everybody. I used to say at Netflix whenever I would try something that was batshit crazy, I would say, look, just like we A/B test everything, this is a test and it may not work out. And if it doesn't work out, we'll just do what everybody else does and we'll call it best practices. because that's literally all that phrase means, right?
Well, and it's like, who said it was best?
Whoever's cool, whoever's cool, right? I mean, when I was trying to, I got to start. I'm explaining to Reed Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, right? Yeah. And he says, this year we'd just gone public, we're early in the company. This year, I want you to be a real HR person, and I want you to put together a presentation to me that explains, current best practices in compensation, right? Yes, sir. So I go out and I survey everything, and I'm going through my PowerPoint presentation. I get to RSUs, and I'm explaining RSUs, and he stops me and he goes, wait a minute. Wait, stop. Like, are you being kind of stupid here now? I'm like, Reed. And he goes, this can't possibly be as complicated as you're making it. And I'm like, dude, I haven't even gotten to taxes yet. And he goes, well, who does this? And I said, well, everybody. And he said, why? And I said, because Google does it. Yeah. And he goes, well, what did we do before Google? I said, whatever Microsoft did. I mean, it's just, so it's not just what everybody else does. It's what the coolest company
it's true.
does. Yeah. And they get to take the lead, whether they're right or not.
Yeah. And it's just sort of fascinating how the RSU thing came about anyways. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I do. And I want to dive a bit deeper on ISS, and this is going to then get us to the RSU thing. So I fundamentally believe that the first major RSU experiment was Amazon. And I think I know the investor that talked them into it. And there was a belief that if you do a Black-Scholes calculation and you're going to hand out X amount of value, that it should be much less share, like units of shares. With a single RSU is worth like 3 options. So if we use RSUs instead of options, instead of this 3 to 4% dilution that was happening at the time, we'll only take 1 or 2. And what has happened over time is we've switched to RSUs, but we've kept the same 3 to 4% mark. And these things are now worth 3 or 4% more. So we've actually ended up with massively more dilution than when we switched to RSUs.
Right, which is the whole point in the first place, right?
Well, one of the reasons we switched to RSUs is because of how ISS works. I had the opportunity, I was working on a podcast with Bob Mylod, who is also an innovator around, he's a longtime executive at Priceline and Booking.com now. And, I would say Booking and Netflix are 2 of the standouts on dilution and performance-based thinking and independent thinking. But anyway, getting ready for that podcast, I talked to some of the researchers at ISS, and basically what I found out is their methodology is to talk to the buy side. And because of how they talk to the buy side, that information is about 4 years old, just because it takes a while to aggregate. And coming out of the dot-com bubble, everyone was upset with options. There was the option mispricing scandals and timing, and everyone felt like options were greedy, and WorldCom, Enron, and all this stuff. And so at the time, if you surveyed the buy side, they said options are bad. So we switched to RSUs, not with first principles thinking, is this better for shareholders, but just because they didn't like it. Now, we end up in a place with RSUs where not only are the companies diluting way more, but they're diluting in downside scenarios. And so with options, there was no dilution when the stock's not performing. But here, now you have that. So 4 years later, the buy side decides they don't like RSUs, or 8 years later or whatever. And so now, they want to do performance RSUs. And sometimes the performance RSUs are tied to the price of the stock, which is a synthetic option. And so, you come all the way around. From
the employee's perspective, if I sit here and I represent an employee, I'm just fucking dizzy at this point, right? Like, I remember a conversation I had with the CEO of a company you're very involved with. And he called me and said, hey, we're about to go public. And do you have any advice for me? And I said, well, from the employee perspective, what's going to happen on the day of the IPO. And he said, yeah, we'll be public and we'll be publicly traded. I'm like, no. Automatically $1 million will be deposited into each of their bank accounts. He goes, well, everybody knows that's not how it works. I'm like, no, they don't. They don't even know how this works. And oh, by the way, they don't know about the lockup. They don't know that the buy side knows about the lockup. They don't know what the analysts are thinking. And by the way, if there's someone who's never worked in a startup or a company that's gone public before and they're an executive, they assume that deposit's going to be a B. Right. No little M's for them. They want a big fat B. So, as I hear you talking about this, I always want to think about and the poor person that's being granted these things just thinks, because we've sold them the story for 35 years. Oh, well, all equity makes you a millionaire. All of you.
You get $1 million. You get $1 million.
You get $1 million. You get $1 million. Anyway, go on. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm just saying, it gets crazy, and now it's getting crazier.
Yeah, and maybe going back to where Jessica had started the question, but you have this process where the comp committee comes together and is trying to decide what to do, and you are basically creating a comp plan that is designed to look like everyone else.
That's right.
Like just rotely designed to look like everybody else. Because
then nobody will scrutinize it.
Right. Yeah. Right. And part of that comes from a shareholder lawsuits and boards and people maybe having a on their back foot kind of mentality. But what I think the best companies do, and we mentioned two of them, is think first principles about what's the objective of the company, and then let it flow down from there. How should we think about building a compensation plan? Now, clearly, you're competing for talent, so knowing what other people are doing is relevant.
Sure.
But it doesn't mean you have to copy them.
And it's maddening to me because I'll be talking to these startups and they're like, okay, so we're going to implement the bonus plan. I'm like, what are we going to base it on? Like, well, everybody else does it. I'm like, but you don't have to do it. But they just they're just copying. Everybody has a bonus.
And they copy the bonus plan of Meta, right?
Yeah.
It's like so you're going to base it on another company I'm working with, very traditional, and it's a finance company, right? They spend 3 months working on the bonus plan. 3 months. CEO, CFO, head of HR, right? They come and they say it to me, and I'm like, before we get started, the company's 7 years old. I understand we're going to talk about the complexity of the bonus plan. I've read the 78-page deck. Have you ever not paid it? Pardon? I'm like, have you ever not paid the annual performance bonus? Excuse me, I'm sorry, Patty, what question you were asking? Have you ever not paid it? Well, actually, no. So I'm like, so it's not a performance bonus, it's deferred comp. Right?
Well, it's a little bit worse because, I mean, it sounds like I may have a rival in you, Patty, but I've never met anyone that hates bonus plans more than myself.
Well, at Netflix, it was back to, we can keep bouncing back and forth to first principles, right? So when we got ready to design a bonus program, I knew that if Reed designed it, nobody on God's earth would understand it. He would make it so complicated because I've already did this with another company. I'm like, no one knows what we're talking about, Reed. Just write him a check, right? But I said to him, let's stop and think. If it's a performance bonus, and we've already said that one of our principles is we're going to hire people who are high performers in the jobs that we need them to do, why on earth would we hire anybody who couldn't make their performance bonus? So why don't we just say, we expect you to have very high performance, and if you don't, you can work somewhere else. That's okay, but we'll just pay you for it. As if you're going to earn it. Same thing with this company I'm advising. I'm like, okay, let's take a look at your population at the time. I'm like, so not 70% are single 30-year-old white guys who live in the city, and you know what they want more money for? Rent.
Yeah.
Right. So
which needs to be reliable.
Yeah. And they can't go to their landlord and go, I'll pay you that extra $1,000 a month in January because I always get $12,000.
Every company I've sat on the board on, I'd rather them have a full salary at 85 or 90% of FTE than have a bonus program because I just can't tell you how many times they've come back and asked to be paid even when they missed the number.
Totally.
Yes.
Totally. Of course they are, because the employee perceives it as guaranteed compensation because it's part of their total comp plan, right?
And if these are your most senior executives and they're good, you want to retain them, right?
Yeah, and pre-cash flow positive companies should never have a bonus plan. That's
for one thing, it's so totally I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say you're going to base it on what happens at the end of the year. Shit, we don't know what's going to happen at the end of the quarter.
Yeah.
Well, that's the other thing. AI comes along and you had an EBITDA target, right? That the bonus plan's tied to, and now the right thing to do for equity, for the reason the board's there to look after shareholder interest, is to spend a bunch of money. And so you're going to miss the target. But you made that decision in July. And now, can we rewrite it?
Yeah.
And if it had never been there, just the effort alone that goes into the bonus plan creation
and
would not
it's
be
not
there.
Just the effort of all the little minions who are calculating what the payout is. It's the effort of the CEO, the CFO,
CHRO.
It's very senior level people that when they realized 3 months into the first quarter of the year, oh shit, we were completely wrong. Right. Now
right. And then they're focused on
now
this.
they have
Yeah,
to do a month-long plan of A, redesigning the plan, B, getting the board approval for the plan, C, explaining it to the employees who now have lost all their confidence that the management team knows what the hell they're doing because they just undid the bonus plan 3 months into the year. So yeah, I'm with you on it. Now, I have to tell you that and Jessica, you know this more than me, not much has changed.
No.
No, and I would put having the clarity of thought to not have a bonus as the type of independent thinking a comp committee could do.
Yes.
A great example of a decision a comp committee could make. It would fly in the face of what the comp consultants will tell them. It might fly in the face of what ISS says, but I think it's inherently the right thing to do for the company.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So for the founders that are listening, you kind of gave a little bit of advice on first principle thinking, but what's your advice for them in setting up compensation and some of the things to avoid? And then what's your advice for employees?
I mean, that's such a broad question. I think a lot of them have a very disoriented view of HR in general as they get started. A lot of founders, come from the founder mode, beast mode mentality types. And those have been told that large companies suck because of red tape and bureaucracy.
They're not wrong.
They're going to view anything that smells of process as bad. Like they don't have bad intent when they come at it that way, but that's a lot of their philosophy. So when you talk about HR practices or building a large HR team, some of them come at it with a that's not for us kind of mindset. And the flip side of that is if you grow super fast and have that mentality, you start to have problems on the other side of the dial.
Yeah. My experience is often that when founders are encouraged to get HR, it often comes from the board, which often comes from VCs who also come from companies, and they say, it's time to grow up. You need to have somebody who's going to get you in line. You need to have an HR person. That HR person's going to do what HR people I know in my experience have always done, right? And I got to tell you, as somebody coming into one of those roles or interviewing for them, it's like, I do not want a job as your mother.
Right.
And yet... It's that tell me what to do thing. And I think that's where the tension comes in, because that same founder who we've been rewarding for innovation and free thinking now says, now you're going to tell me I have to have somebody tell me what to do? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and let me tell you the types of things that lead to that exact type of prescription you described. A lot of the most competitive venture capitalists are young.
Yeah.
There's a great reason for that. So they're inexperienced in and of themselves. A lot of them, because it's so competitive, have become more cheerleader than overseer. And I think that trend's been, and so they're encouraging to break things and move fast. And someone wakes up and realizes that you're a 200 employee company. You've never had performance reviews ever. There may not be a weekly management team meeting. You're not sure that the equity cap table's been kept properly. That's right. And so you have this kind of aha moment like, oh shit, we're out over our skis. And that leads to the hire you're talking about.
Yeah.
The other thing I think that if we could reframe our role in HR, and maybe you can help us do this, Bill, with founders. It's like,
I'd love to.
So I used to say that I was the COO of the culture, which meant if we said we are going to hire adults who are high performers, who are very intelligent, then let's not insult their intelligence by giving them what time you have to be at work stuff, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Or I would say I was the product manager for the people side.
Yeah.
Right. Which is, okay, let's say I believe that performance is better if you get feedback. So I would want a system that provides efficient, but I was going to get to that word. What if it was redefined as, this is an organization that's there to bring efficiency to the...
Well, that's what I always called myself. I don't do HR. I'm the chief effectiveness officer, right?
Yeah.
Like my job is to make the organization more effective.
Right.
I'm not going to come in and put the policies in, right? We're going to figure out how to operate and have operational excellence at every level. And I'm going to build systems and things that allow for that.
I think that's an amazing perspective. And the word that I think about when I think about you two and what you created, in addition to independent and innovative, I would say performant. So are you trying to build an HR organization? And I think this could be said of the comp committee as well, that encourages best performance. Like is that the objective of
as measured by, oh, by the way, everything else.
Everything else, yeah.
Right. So HR, I don't anymore because it makes me crazy. But when I used to do these giant HR talks, they would say, what do you think is the most important metric for HR? I'm like, the P&L. Like the metrics are there. You don't have to make up your own, because it's not tied to the business in a way that makes the business profitable or efficient or effective. And I think that's when you get that mindset, or if maybe the three of us can help drive that mindset, then people will stop and say, if this takes my entire management team 6 hours a week, that's 6 hours they're not doing what we need them to do on behalf of the customer and the product, right? So it's, and for me, it was always that, the effectiveness ratio, right? What's your return on investment, right? Yeah. So if I do an ROI on literally everything we do in HR, half of it doesn't even have a return.
Well, more than half, I'd say.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's all these well-meaning folks that are in the function, but they've just been, unfortunately, they've been trained in a system that, isn't innovative and is sort of like a playbook. Like you take the playbook from here and apply it to here. And so there isn't like first principle thinking, and there isn't innovation. And then I also think that there's a little bit of, and Bill, you know this, like the CHRO turnover is just really high. One, it's a hard role, but two, it's hard with the founder. That adds another complexity. But also, I think that there's just a lag in the function, because you have these founders or CEOs who want innovation and they want strategy, but the folks in the function haven't been allowed to do that in their past jobs, nor have they been trained to do that. Right. And maybe they could if they were allowed. Patty and I are privileged in a way because we worked for a CEO who fostered that and allowed that. And he didn't,
allowed.
Well,
I mean, look, you guys may be so humble you don't promote yourselves, but like any founder that stumbled upon this and is listening to it should go back and look at the big 100-page deck that Netflix put out, or Patty's book, and you will see what many would describe as radical thinking. And I use that word kind of loaded. I mean independently minded thinking.
But it's not.
Thinking.
It's just logical.
But not correlated with what the majority of people are doing.
The question I have for you now as relates to this is, let's talk about what you need when they say you need HR. One of the things I get is there's a very different answer depending on where you are, right? If somebody calls me and they're like, I have 25 people, we're going to go up to 50. What do we need in an HR person? And I say, not a damn thing. You need to just be honest and figure it out. And oh, by the way, the culture is yours forever and ever and ever. And if you think you're going to hire somebody to do it, you're not. So there's what do you need at the early stage? What do you need when you start to scale? And how do you rethink it from your perspective as an investor when that IPO is in the offing?
Yeah. So I agree with you in the early stage. What does pop up, and what I think some founders get behind on, is how do you run a weekly management team meeting? Not that that's HR's responsibility, but like they need to communicate with the team, and they can't silo information, and they may not know that. And they need to do some amount of performance review and coaching with the team that they've hired.
That's right.
And both of those things, you'd be surprised how big companies get with doing neither of those. And my approach to making sure that happens is I tell the founders I work with, go find 3 CEOs, ask them what their practice management is, and pick the one you like the best. I'm not prescriptive.
No, really good advice.
Have something. Like don't have nothing. So I think that can get you pretty far. I think that might get you to 100 employees even, just with that mindset. You do need to make sure you're doing payroll right. And building whatever your equity compensation plan, it needs some amount of thought, like even down at that early stage. Like you do kind of need to know what you're doing down there. I have mixed feelings about like the word culture and mission, because I find that performance gets left out. And quite frankly, when Yahoo was soaring, I'm sure everyone thought it had a great culture. And when it broke, everyone thought it had a bad culture. And in the long run, you're not going to have a great culture in a non-performant company. Like you're not. Yeah. So I worry at times when it's held out as, this is the single most important thing, because I don't think it's durable.
I couldn't agree with you. I'm consulting to this company, and this is in the last bubble, right? And we have all these chief happiness officers. Ugh. Right. So I'm consulting to the chief happiness officers, and I'm sincere. I'm not being sarcastic. I'm asking them, like, what do you do? like when you come in the morning and you sit at a desk, what do you do? And so the assignment I would give them is, and I think you'll agree with this because this is back to performance. I'm like, find 5 people in the organization that are amazing. Everybody knows they're amazing. It doesn't have to have a title attached to it, and ask them to tell you about something they did where they thought they made a difference in the company. And I tell them every single answer will be about something hard, right? Yeah. So making them happy is not, it's not
the goal.
Yeah.
Well, I think, back to your point, Bill, about culture and mission. And I think there is a lot of confusion on that. And, I think people
I'm not anti-culture or anti.
No,
but it's such an overuse. Like, what the hell are we talking about?
Culture is how you work.
Right.
It's not. Of course, there's values attached to it, but it's how the organization operates. It's how you make decisions. It's how you get alignment. It's how you communicate with each other. And then a mission. It's a purpose, right? There's a purpose for what we're doing. Right. And I think that a lot of folks do miss the performance in that. But in order to achieve mission and in order to achieve operational excellence, which is a great culture, you have to have performance. You have to have great people. You won't achieve either when you don't have high performance.
I want to share a story that ties this together and also brings in one of the things Patty hinted at with this happiness officer is some of the modern realities. That would have never been a role 20 years ago. I was listening about 2 years ago. I was listening to a podcast with Shane Battier. Ravi Gupta was interviewing him. It's on the O'Shaughnessy podcast. And those two now have a podcast they're doing regularly. But Ravi works for Sequoia Growth Fund, and Shane Battier is a very famous and quite intellectual former NBA player, and fascinating guy. I've gotten to know him. And Robbie was pushing him on what, were Coach K's philosophies and Coach Krzyzewski at Duke. Yeah. And I was writing them down. I'm thinking, I'm going to forward this around to my CEO. And after the podcast was over, I was looking at my notes, and several of the things I wrote down, I think would be considered apocryphal in some modern HR departments. So, one of them was team first. And if you're thinking about a sports organization, of course, that's awesome. That's great. Team first. Everybody'd rally around that spirit. But team over individual in a company, is that okay? Mm-hmm. And there are people today that think, the role of the HR department is to protect the individual, kind of a union mindset. He talked about the best players show up first and leave last. Yeah. Krzyzewski, show up first, leave last. And I I had this thing in my mind, like, we have employees who don't want to come into the office, 5 days a week, much less they don't want to come in 3 days a week. And I'm thinking, well, how does that square with Coach Krzyzewski saying first one to show up and last one to leave?
Yeah.
And just the radical difference between those two mindsets and what was modern was really kind of shocking to me when I went back and reflected on it. And, you guys talk about performance orientation, and that's consistent with what Coach K was trying to achieve, right?
If we're going to push the sports metaphor, the point would be at work, it's about what you put on the scoreboard.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. So you may not have to be first in, last out in the office to put the numbers on the scoreboard. Right. So for me,
Patty, I was thinking the same thing. It's like you can be first in virtually as well. But when you want magic to happen in your organization, magic happens because you have the best team.
Yeah.
It's not you just one great individual, right? You have the best team of people working. It takes a team to make a company happen. I think team first is great.
The other thing that I would say that ties into the newer generation, I happened to have coffee the other day with Greg Lukianoff, who was one of the co-authors of Coddling of the American Mind. With Jonathan Haidt. And they almost wrote a follow-up book about what was going to happen at corporations when this group of youngsters is taught this way in college, and then what their expectations are going to be as they move into a corporate environment. And I hear this quite a bit from founders and CEOs, like the younger generation has an expectation set that's quite misaligned with all the things that we're talking about.
Maybe. It's just different. You have to be willing to change it up. I mean, people tell me, I asked Reed one time, could I go back into Netflix and run HR? He's like, oh my God, we'd fire you in a hot minute. There is no way, right? And even for Jessica, and she hasn't even been gone that long, it's such a different organization now. Yeah. And so there are different people who have different skills at different times, and the workforce changes. And there's more of them than there are of us.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, gosh. Bill, we have to wrap up. We're running out of time, which I'm bummed about because I feel like we could go. I know. I feel like we could go on for a couple more hours. Okay. We always like to leave the listeners with a little nugget. So do you have anything that you want to leave them with? Final thoughts?
Nugget, man.
Yeah, I would just encourage everyone, and specifically in HR and definitely in comp committees, try and ask yourself, are you thinking first principles and are you thinking independently? And are you thinking with a performance mindset? Like, are you trying to make the organization perform better than it is today? Because I don't think they start that way, especially more in the compensation committee than in HR. But that would be my thing. And I think you guys, have proven what can happen when you think independently. For those that don't know, Netflix is like an incredible outlier on dilution as a percentage of all shares. It's like 1 point something percent below everyone else. Yeah, just a whole bunch of stuff that's just very unique, but very performant. And you guys are doing a great service with this podcast in helping to educate innovative HR leaders. I don't think there is a conduit or outlet for someone to educate independently minded compensation committee chairs. It's just too bespoke of a thing, and how, maybe someone will listen to this and I'll get invited to think about how to do that. But like, it's a really difficult problem because the people that are on those committees it's not their day job, it's not a full-time job. And I don't know that there's a place for them to learn to think about it that way.
Oh, that's true.
I'll help you. We'll help you.
Yeah, we'll help. we're going to roll into career confessions real quick.
Okay.
Here we go. I've been working at a small company for over a decade, and last year was given the go-ahead to bring a new executive to oversee some branding changes as we look towards future-proofing the company. However, since headhunting and filling the position with somebody who has great potential, the board/CEO have slowed down on decision-making in terms of the company's future, and our new hire isn't enjoying the lack of work he was promised. It looks like he'll be leaving the company soon. How do I make sure this wasn't a waste of all of our time?
I think it's never a waste of your time. It's always a learning experience.
Yeah.
Right. So, but a lot of times, when you're creating a new position, you just don't really know. Right. I mean, like I always say, the reason things don't work out is either A, you just hired the wrong person. This might be a situation where you thought it was going to be something that it didn't turn out to be. And that's kind of a no harm, no foul situation. You just learn from it. But you don't keep them around and try and make them happy when they're not happy.
Yeah, especially if they can't be effective. Bill, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, like companies, there's a lot of exogenous variables, and you may think you're going to double headcount next year, and then the industry, has a downturn, and you're not. Yeah, and that happens. One thing you could try before parting ways is, would this person be interested in doing other things? They're already on the payroll.
Yeah.
Like, could you give them other projects, or are they willing to work on more things maybe than their original scope? They might not want to, but that's worth exploring before the final.
I think that's good advice. And I know it can kind of feel like you baited and switched them, right?
Yep.
But at the same time, you kind of did. But you didn't know. You didn't do it intentionally. You didn't know.
You didn't know.
And we're all making it up as we go along. And you're making it up with the best intentions and as much thoughtfulness as you can. And sometimes you get it wrong. It's okay.
I think it's important to say though what you shouldn't do. You should not put this person on a performance improvement plan and prove in writing that they're incompetent, which they're not. But people, back to Bill saying, I think that people don't understand how to think about things differently. This is a case where people who are leaders don't learn how to take responsibility for screwing it up. The person has no fault in this situation.
Yeah, no.
Right? Yeah. I mean, they didn't do anything wrong.
Agreed.
And the worst thing you can do
is make them feel like they did.
Go to your traditional HR handbook and go, well, better put this person on a PIP because we got to get rid of them.
Yeah. Ugh. Well, good advice. Bill, thank you so much.
This is
we were so happy to have you.
Thanks to both of you. Privileged to be on.
Thanks for listening to TruthWorks. This episode was produced by Megan Hayward. Thank you to Kathleen Speckert and the whole Edit Audio team.